No Place for Bravery sees you take up the role of Thorn, a warrior turned tavern owner who, after the kidnapping of his daughter Leaf by a warlock, stumbled upon the chance to rescue her 10 years later. Thorn will wander a war-torn world, slicing through hordes of enemies in his quest. You'll run into past companions and find out more about how the world came to be the way it is. Probably the first thing that will strike you about No Place for Bravery is the pixel art. The game's low fantasy setting is perfectly captured in a series of striking scenes that perfectly show Doer's dire state. As a world, Doer almost seems to be rotting. The character design is quite good too, for the most part. There's an odd mix of realism and hyper-deformed going on with some of the characters. Thorn himself is designed as a huge barrel as a man, but with literal sticks for legs. The landscape design is extremely well done, and the game goes to excessive lengths to shoehorn in as many gorgeous panoramic shots as it can into as many cutscenes as it can, which will lead to the first of many issues with this game. The cutscenes are filled with an insufferable amount of fade to black jump cuts which happen anytime there's a shift in focus in the scene, leading to the camera bouncing around, desperately trying to draw your attention like a neglected stepchild. The sheer frequency of these jump cuts is enough to give you a headache, with one dialogue scene that lasted a mere 45 seconds having nearly 14 jump cuts. Music is the only area where No Place for Bravery has no issues. The music is brilliant, my favourite track being the atmospheric title track with its choral chanting and rumbling drums. The incidental background music for the rest of the game matches each area and helps give the landscape art a little bit extra of impact to make each area stand out. The sound design is another matter altogether. It's uniformly awful, with the main issue being that it doesn't sync up properly with the action on screen. This robs the visceral executions of any impact the devs desperately wanted them to have. It also makes parrying near fucking impossible to pull off, as the audio cue for the hit kicks in a half beat before the hit lands, meaning you're just guessing at when the correct timing is. The main story of Thorn's odyssey through Doer is a simple one. Find and rescue Leaf and make the person who took her pay. A fairly rote story by all accounts, the devs have tried to set No Place for Bravery apart by claiming that the story explores the themes of strong father figures, parental obligations and consequences. But it's undermined so often it's rendered meaningless. Take the part about choice and consequence. Throughout the game, Thorn's only options in response to a dilemma is either passivity or murderous aggression. Calm or kill. Those are my only two options, regardless of the situation. There's no way you can create any nuance in the narrative with such binary options. This also has the probably unintended effect of painting Thorn out as a complete psychopath. Definitely not ideal fodder for a story claiming to explore parental issues. One of the options the story offers you is the choice to end the search for Leaf at certain points. These sections are usually proffered to you by a companion pleading with you to give up Thorn's quest for vengeance and let the past lie and move on, a theme the game preaches constantly. Choosing the peaceful route results in Thorn happily resigning himself to his new life and his old friends, but you're forced to pick the aggressive route if you want to see the rest of the game. However, this all falls flat when taking the game to the end and you realise that the actions whose consequences you're going through didn't occur during the game and you have no control over the main outcome. Not only does this make a mockery of one of the game's intended purposes, but it also renders all of the shorter sub-endings moot. Thorn isn't quitting to live in peace, he's quitting to live in ignorance of his actions. And I don't think that's what the developers were thinking. When it came to some of the more esoteric elements of the story, such as the reoccurring enemy Dark Thorn, I was left clueless about why he existed, where he came from, or what was to be gained by beating him. I was never familiar with the meaning behind this character, and the writers have no interest in aiding me with any of that or any of the other aspects of the story. Right, gameplay. First things first, the game is advertised as being an action RPG, but there's not a shred of any RPG elements in this game. There are no upgrades past 2 new weapons, and there's only 2 new attacks with each of them. The areas, while very pretty, are quite linear, so there's also no exploration to speak of either. The gameplay is easily the low watermark of No Place for Bravery, with the nadir being the combat. This is where the game wears most of its influences on its sleeve. The devs clearly love the Souls games and Sekiro. In fact, the game is advertised as having Sekiro-like combat, but they've just taken some of the mechanics from these games without fully understanding them. They know they work, but they don't know why they work. Take the stagger mechanic for example. Lifted wholesale from Sekiro, it's where your attacks and timed parries break an opponent's stance. But unlike Sekiro, this doesn't leave them open to a death blow, it's just a stunning pause to do some extra damage. Due to the hectic nature of the combat, this makes it quite pointless to use on any enemy that it's not specifically designed to be used on. This is compounded by the inclusion of a stamina bar, something that's in the Souls games, but was specifically taken out of Sekiro precisely because it doesn't suit the faster parry based combat in Sekiro. To make matters worse, the 2 mechanics work against each other, leading at times to you breaking an enemy's stance, only to find that all the parrying has drained your stamina, so you can't follow up with more than 1 hit. The block parry is a really strange timing to it. Since Thorn uses a shield to block but attacks using a 2-handed sword, the block animation is Thorn pulling his shield down over his shoulder. This means you're never sure at what exact point you're actually guarding yourself. The combat has a floaty, weightless feel to it. Your attacks don't stagger enemies, so you'll usually wind up taking damage during your combos. This leads you to never really knowing when's a good time to attack or block. The fact that the enemies can't be staggered, combined with their reliance on spam attacks, results in the weird scenario where ranged enemies get more dangerous the closer you are to them, because at close range, their attacks are impossible to avoid. I was often shredded by an archer as, after I closed the gap and began carving him up, he no-sold my attacks and unloaded a 4-arrow volley at point blank range. The oddest thing about the combat is its obsession with the execution moves. Incapacitated enemies can be finished off, but they won't fall unless you do these execution moves, and there's no advantage to doing them. There's no incentive to try and weave them into the combat. The opposite in fact, as performing the execution leaves you wide open to attacks, making them utterly pointless. In conclusion, one of the best parts of No Place for Bravery is the narrative. It's certainly the only reason I kept playing for as long as I did. There's a good story at the heart of Thorn's arc, and it's interesting despite it completely running out of steam towards the end. Too bad the rest of the game is such a total letdown. Some stunning scenes, good music and a decent story does not make up for the brutal, unfair combat, the tedious backtracking, a host of obnoxious design choices and a plethora of bugs. I'd love to be able to state that No Place for Bravery would be good after some patching, but what's wrong with this game is down to some fundamentally poor design choices. And that's not something you can fix with a patch.